How BlackRock quietly controls Germany's economy. What if I told you the most powerful player in Germany's economy isn't a politician, a CEO, or even a central banker? It's a company most people have never interacted with directly. BlackRock. But over time, through strategic acquisitions and the explosive growth of passive investing, BlackRock became the single largest asset manager in the world. We're talking about companies like Siemens, Bayer, Allianz, Deutsche Telekom, Deutsche Bank. In some cases, BlackRock owns between 3% and 10% of the shares. In 2023 alone, BlackRock voted on over 170,000 proposals at more than 18,000 shareholder meetings. In 2008, during the global financial crisis, and again during the COVID-19 pandemic, BlackRock was hired as a consultant by central banks, including the European Central Bank and Germany's Bundesbank. It is advised on everything from purchasing corporate bonds to managing toxic assets. They often align with management, but their voice carries immense weight, particularly in Germany, where companies operate under a dual-board system, and corporate governance structures give shareholders substantial say. This caused major controversy. How could a politician be so closely linked to a firm that owns pieces of nearly every major German company? Critics argued this represented a dangerous blend of political influence and private capital concentration. That might not sound like a lot until you realize that in German corporate structures, even small stakes can represent massive influence, especially when ownership is fragmented among institutional and private shareholders. They claim their stewardship is about long-term value creation and responsible investment. And to be fair, they do publish detailed reports about how they vote and why. But transparency does not equal accountability. The German Federal Financial Supervisory Authority has acknowledged that the concentration of voting rights among a few giant asset managers poses potential systemic risks. And employ the leader of a major political party? Then we're no longer talking about finance. We're talking about power. And power, especially when invisible, deserves scrutiny. Nor do they realize that this asset manager has ties to top political figures and advises the very governments that regulate it. The EU has also initiated discussions on whether asset managers like BlackRock should face stricter regulation and oversight. First, awareness. Investors should understand where their money is going and what kind of power they are delegating. Second, reform. Regulators should consider new frameworks for separating asset ownership from corporate control. Third, diversification, not just in investments, but in influence. Germany and Europe more broadly needs to reconsider the wisdom of relying so heavily on a handful of financial giants. Is Germany's corporate and political ecosystem becoming too reliant on one American asset manager? And is the public even aware of it? Despite BlackRock's growing presence, there is very little mainstream media coverage in Germany about the firm's growing influence. Journalists who try to investigate often face hurdles: limited transparency, complex ownership webs, and the sheer scale of the company's operations. If BlackRock ever had to unwind large positions due to regulatory pressure, market crashes, or liquidity issues, it could create shockwaves through the DAX and other major indices. Second, conflict of interest. If BlackRock advises both companies and governments, how impartial can its recommendations really be? Third, democratic legitimacy. When one private firm, unelected and largely unaccountable, influences the direction of national economies, we enter dangerous territory. It's not easy to dissect a firm that operates behind layers of passive funds, subsidiaries, and global mandates. Its most popular product line, iShares ETFs, allowed ordinary investors around the globe to buy into markets easily and cheaply. But in doing so, these ETFs gave BlackRock voting power over thousands of companies, voting power that individual investors essentially surrender. With over $10 trillion in assets under management, BlackRock is not just a financial giant, it's a force that permeates markets and governments alike. In Germany, its influence is deep, complex, and mostly invisible to the public eye. BlackRock began in 1988, focused on risk management and bond investments. In Germany, BlackRock holds significant stakes in nearly every major DAX-listed corporation. Through these positions, BlackRock has the right to vote on executive pay packages, board member appointments, sustainability strategies, mergers and acquisitions, and broader corporate direction. And here's the crucial part. It's not the ETF investor who votes. BlackRock votes on behalf of millions of investors who hold these funds, most of whom have no idea how their shares are being used. BlackRock maintains a global stewardship team, whose sole job is to engage with corporate boards and vote on thousands of resolutions each year. What makes the situation even more complex is BlackRock's role not only as a shareholder, but also as an advisor. And then there's politics. In 2018, Friedrich Merz, the leader of Germany's CDU, was appointed as the chairman of BlackRock Germany. Merz downplayed any conflict of interest, saying his role was mostly symbolic, but it raised serious questions. How far does BlackRock's influence go? Let's also talk about media silence. Meanwhile, financial regulators in Germany and the EU are beginning to raise concerns. So what are the actual risks? First, systemic risk. Of course, BlackRock argues that it is simply acting in the best interests of its clients. Retail and institutional investors who want low-cost, diversified exposure to global markets. The average German citizen has no idea that their retirement savings, invested through insurance products, pension funds, or ETFs, are voting in corporate boardrooms under the direction of one massive US-based asset manager. So what can be done? Because if a single company can influence executive decisions at Siemens, vote at Deutsche Bank's shareholder meeting, advise the ECB,